Thank you, Chair. And so in this paper, we look at whether poverty alleviation policies as transfer programs, social protection transfer programs, enhance household resilience to poverty, and we present experimental evidence from Bangladesh. And this paper is joined with Indranil Dotto in Manchester, John Hodinott in Cornell, and myself. So there is a strong evidence that cash transfers are effective in the short term at increasing household expenditure consumption and as well as kind of welfare across multiple domains. And it is also, but what we need to know is that does such transfer programs build households' resilience to future shocks, right? And whether that helps sustain kind of the ability to not fall back into poverty in the face of unexpected shocks. So what are the medium to long-term impact of these transfer programs, because that evidence right now is kind of mixed. It goes both ways. So for example, like I can give a couple of examples. For example, in India and Bangladesh, the Targeting the Ultra-Poor program has seen good impact over the medium and long term, while on the other hand, for example, programs in Zambia, Indonesia, the impacts have faded over time. So we are focusing in this paper not just on welfare drops after shock, but on the probability of households in achieving some minimum standard of living in the future. Okay, and we will unpack more into that. So we investigate. So in this paper, we investigate three things. So one is the form of transfer, whether it affects resilience to poverty. So does modality matter? We explore the impact on resilience if they're dependent on kind of additional programming. So whether like cash plus or food plus kind of programs have any benefits to resilience to poverty. And we also explore whether these interventions have the same impact in different regions within the same country. So does context matter? Okay, and we assess both short-term or the immediate and the medium-term sustained impacts on households' resilience to poverty, and we explore some of the mechanisms that we believe would underlie our findings. So our contribution to the literature I've listed here. So we go beyond just cash and food transfer. So we include real world kind of programming. So in this particular case, we incorporate nutrition programming with cash and food. So we have a broader policy lens, and we assess the resilience 4 years post-program, so 4 years after the transfers have ended. So because we have a lot of evidence from short-term evaluations, we now need to see medium to long-term impacts. And we use a measure of resilience that is ex ante, and which is also reference dependent kind of threshold approach using the $90 a day extreme poverty line. I will go more deeper into that in the next slides. And we also use machine learning to construct our resilience measure. So we employ Lasso to select the predictors of consumption, so that we have a robust kind of resilience estimation. So we use a program in Bangladesh called the Transfer Modality Research Initiative, the TMRI, which was implemented by WFP and IFPRI in Bangladesh. So it was a randomized control trial in 2 regions of Bangladesh. So it happened from 2012 to 2014. It was targeted to mothers of children with less than 2 years of age in very poor rural households who are not receiving any other kind of social protection transfer, I must add. So that was one of the eligibility criteria. And we have a monthly cash transfer of about 1,500 taka at that time, which is about $19 US at that time, and or equivalent value of food, which was a kind of a bundle of basket of food, so rice, lentils, and fortified oil, which was also worth 1,500 taka. And it was with or without a group-based nutrition BCC. So in the north, we have the 4 arms. So So we have a control, a pure control, and then cash, 1500 taka food, 1500 taka equivalent of food basket, and the cash plus BCC. So the nutrition programming, and in the south it's the same, but in the south we explored food plus nutrition BCC. And 1500 taka, just a little bit of context, 1500 taka at that time in the baseline were 32% of households' food expenditure at the baseline. So very quickly, what was the nutrition behavioral change communication about? So it was a weekly meeting at the village level of the beneficiary mothers with a trained community nutrition worker, and the nutrition focused on the training focused on nutrition, infant and young feeding practices, and sometimes it was also combined with other family members as well, just to reinstate the benefits of these kind of practices to other family members as well. And there was also twice a month home visits by community nutrition workers to the household of the beneficiary. And there was also monthly meetings between the program staff and also the kind of the influential community leaders in terms of the local elected members, maybe the religious leaders and things like that. And just in terms of perspective, so this is Bangladesh, and these were the districts in the south. Those were the districts in the north. So there were 4,000 households that were selected, which is randomized within these two areas, so 2,000 in the south and 2,000 in the north. Randomization were in the village level. So treatment randomization were in the village level. And 50 villages were randomized to each of the, this might give more context, sorry. So 50 villages in each of the arms, which makes it 200 villages. And from each village, there were 10 participants selected, so 500, 500, 500, 500. So in total, there were 2,000 households in the north and 2,000 households in the south. In a bit more context, so in the north, the districts were from the division Rangpur. Rangpur is one of the poorest regions of Bangladesh. It had very high rates of poverty, but better agroecological conditions. And these households were more likely to be farmers and rent in with rent in land. And in the south, which was Borishal and Khulna, so this is the Bay of Bengal. So it's more prone to natural disasters. So cyclones and flooding is more common. But they were also slightly less poor than the houses in the north. And they also had less favorable agroecological conditions. And they're more likely to be day laborers as well. So the intervention was done over 2 years, monthly interventions, so 24 interventions over the 2 years from baseline 2012 to the end line 2014. And then there was a follow-up 4 years after the program ended in April 2018. And there was a bit of attrition from the baseline sample of 4,000 households, which was about 10%, but attrition analysis revealed that it was not, so there was no systematic correlation with treatment status. So the measurement of resilience. So in terms of, okay, so we define resilience as the ability of the household to avoid falling below a threshold in the future. So this is our kind of vulnerability measure. So probability of falling below this poverty line, ZH, in the future, where our poverty line is a function of both the household's current consumption and also the set poverty line. So it's a combination of both current consumption and the poverty line. So that's why we're saying it's a reference-dependent kind of threshold. So this is our resilience threshold. So above this threshold, individuals are considered resilient. and this is the future distribution of consumption that we would measure, right? And our resilience, it's just the flip side. So as per literature, it's just the flip side of the vulnerability measure that we are doing. So it's resilience is 1 minus the vulnerability. And then to estimate the future consumption, we use the feasible generalized least square method that's in the literature, first done by Chaudhary et al. In 2022. So what we do is that we estimate, so we assume a log normal distribution of consumption, and from there we estimate the mean and the variance of the distribution. So we estimate household consumption from this following regression, where X is a vector of control variables, which is selected by machine learning or lasso, because as we all know, you can put everything into a consumption function, right? So a lot of determinants are there that might affect consumption. So it's very important to choose what actually goes into this consumption. So for example, in the South, we saw that since in the South it's more vulnerable to shock variables were not selected by lasso, but we have shocks variables in the North. Okay, so those are some of the new nuances that went in. And then, so using this function, we can get the residuals, and then we estimate this stochastic function and then we use those squared residuals to kind of predict the future value of consumption. Okay, and then with our resilience measure, we then have that as the outcome, and we estimate a standard ANCOVA measure where we control for the baseline resilience as well. And we do it separately for the North and South. And we have each of the arms of interventions here. And standard errors are clustered at the village level because that's the level of randomization. Well, with a boom, let's go into the results. So what we see. So we have, just to break this long table down, so we have our N-line results here, 4-year post-program, separated by North and South, okay? And then this value of alpha, remember alpha is what defines our threshold. So if alpha is 1, it is just the poverty line. And if alpha is less than 1, this is a combination of both the poverty line and also the consumption, the current consumption of the household. So, so what do we see? We see that at N line in the North, all the arms had impact on households' resilience to poverty. Okay, and however, if you look at the p-values here, which test whether these differences are significant, we do not see any significant differential impact between the arms to vulnerability, to resilience to poverty, right? But in the South, at N line, we just see impact of cash and the food plus BCC arm, right? But no impact from food. And what we see is that as we move further away from the intervention, after 4 years, the effects kind of fade away, right? So we just have effect in cash and in cash plus BCC, but when we have the poverty line and not when we take into account their current level of consumption. Okay. So this kind of tells you that as the period progressed, the household's kind of average consumption went beyond the $1.90 level. So in terms of this higher poverty threshold, we see that at the end line, there's just impact from cash plus VCC and food. But in terms of the other arms in North and South, all the effects have kind of faded away. So what might be some of the mechanisms with which this happens? So we look at some coping mechanisms which provides very short-term kind of liquidity to these households. So we have our savings, which would provide liquidity and also cash in hand. So this is for the North. We see that there is increase in savings by the females, and increase in the number of saving sources. So they are diversifying their saving sources as well. And there is also increase in cash in hand. But over time, after 4 years, it kind of fades away. So we just have increase, some impact on total savings, but in terms of cash in hand, number of saving sources, it fades away. And similar situation in the South as well. And because of lack of time, I'll just move on to more kind of structural adaptive mechanisms that the households might take. So we look at debt, we look at assets, and we look at remittances. We see that households, because they're very poor, they are not really reducing their debt as much, right? So there's no significant effect on debt, but they're more kind of doing their build-up of assets. But it all fades away 4-year post-program. And similarly in the South, we see very similar pictures, and it fades away 4-year post-program. So what are the key takeaways? Let me just summarize. So our key takeaway is that, so there is direct causal link between these poverty alleviation transfers, and they improve households' resilience to poverty, but at lower thresholds, right? So when we moved to higher thresholds at 320, it was not there. What were the regional differences? So there is greater impact in the North, which was poorer compared to the South. And especially after 4 years, it faded away because in the South, the control households could catch up to these treatment households. And in terms of what were the effective strategies, we saw cash and cash plus VCC, or the plus programs. So cash plus VCC or food plus VCC. So the plus programs have the most significant effect in boosting resilience. And in terms of impact pathways, we see that in the short term, it increased savings, especially with cash and cash plus VCC programs. And in the long term, it was more asset building, notably with cash and cash plus VCC strategies. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much.